Hi, I'm Lisa Anderson, president of LMA Consulting Group and host of Supply Chain Chats. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Alan Dunn, who is president of GDI Consulting and Training. And we're going to talk about tariffs, some strategies to offset the effects of tariffs, but also maybe some common sense, good manufacturing and process practices that companies should be looking at regardless. We'll go from there. We have lots to talk about. So with that said, I guess we'll set the stage here. Quite clearly, tariffs have become a hot topic since April, when Liberation Day came into the forefront, when the U.S. set tariffs on a wide swath of countries. From there, we have had some successes with some frameworks of agreements set up throughout the world, but there are still many countries remaining. So lots of companies have been trying to figure out the best way to navigate tariffs, and more importantly, what should they be doing and thinking about moving forward in our new world, which is really much more of a, you have to be thinking more. It's more complex than it ever has been in the past, because we're moving from global to, we have to be actually thinking through lots of options. So, Alan, what would you say about that? I know that you and I have talked before that, like, the world has become more complex in a way. What do you think about that?
Well, from a supply chain perspective, the supply chain world has become definitely more complex. I would say it's logarithmically more complex. And the reason for that is, well, actually, there's several reasons behind that. One is when China entered the WTO, the World Trade Organization, this changed global trade forever. So it's interesting that that China is a very large country. It's a fairly authoritarian country. So they don't need to have a lot of political work to go behind making policy. Policy can be made fairly quickly. And so China looked back at the Industrial Revolution and said, hey, the way to get out of a second world or third world national status and get to that first world is through building a robust manufacturing sector. That's exactly what the United States did. It's exactly what Western Europe did. It's exactly what Great Britain did. But we've moved away from that. I always remark when I fly over Southern California, I don't see factories anymore. I see big, giant distribution centers.
Absolutely true.
So China entering the WTO, China becoming a global partner for a lot of companies as well as countries, and then the reduction in manufacturing from its high in the 1950s to very low single digit in terms of employment in the U.S. now. That's contributed.
I think has also created this issue with products, our knowledge base related to products related to like national security and those types of things. So in addition to the volume loss, but maybe it's one of the next things you were going to say.
Well, and that's so when you have a country that builds, especially a large authoritarian basic communist country builds, you create a whole different political dynamic and a whole different power dynamic across the globe. So that creates all kinds of other industries and sub-industries and grows industries like the defense industry. So China has probably done more for the defense industry. Definitely there is revenue in the defense industry that is directly created as a result of the potential threats from China. I would argue that the threats from China are less military and more economic. And I totally hope I'm correct on this one too. But nevertheless, it has changed the world forever. And then the consequences of that were that when companies started looking at the concentration of supply, and companies themselves looked at the concentration of supply coming from China, they started looking elsewhere in the world. And this, of course, is now the reason behind the growth in a lot of Latin American countries, particularly Brazil, and other Southeast Asian countries, particularly Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, which in my lifetime were never thought to be partners of the U.S., but now they are legitimate sources of critical supply components and ingredients and raw materials. So the complexity has happened largely because of globalization of trade And that has, of course, created the opportunity to manipulate or manage trade through tariffs or through restraints. So I've said for a year now, the Trump administration's focus on tariffs has less to do with tariffs, although they love the byproduct of all the revenue going into the Treasury. It's more
Sure.
about changing the rules of global trade. And it's about opening foreign markets that have been closed to the U.S. and to North America, so Canada, even Mexico, for a lot of years. So
I
this
mean,
is
well, absolutely. I mean, it relates to opening markets. It also relates to, you know, making sure that you have access to things from, medical devices, pharmaceuticals,
right,
to rare earths that are needed for everyday life, from all
right,
of our technology and electronics to defense, right? I mean,
right.
it's surprising how much skills we've lost, I guess you could say.
Right. Several years ago when Nick Testa and I worked on that sovereign supply chain article, it turned into a kind of a mini booklet. And the research for that really opened my eyes because as we discovered it's not just toys and trinkets and car parts and things like that coming from Asia. There's actually very precise electromechanical components used in the defense industry, used in some of the most top secret sort of aircraft and missiles and defense systems. And we said, I think Nick was the one who said, he goes, I don't have a problem with buying bread from China, but I got a real problem buying triggers for nuclear missiles. And
Okay. Well, I
so,
don't have a problem buying toys. I'm not totally sure about bread, but
oh,
toys
yeah,
is
yeah,
fine. I don't
fair
know
enough.
about anything that could be, you know,
Right.
uh, yeah, related to defense or poisoning.
Right. Well, it might surprise you that over 75% of all the ingredients going in nutritional supplements, so vitamins and all comes from
It's
China now.
it's
And and there's
horrifying.
and there are huge problems with that. There's not a week goes by that there's not a problem with a Chinese ingredient in a vitamin or in some sort of nutritional supplement. And so the quality assurance on that side is problematic. Now, technology is going to help us because, particularly if you take
Yeah.
a look at the food safety tools and the food safety transparency, where you can look at a label and you can get all the way down to the field that the alfalfa came from and what was put on that field. And I know IBM's been doing a lot of work on food
Mhm.
safety transparency software and tools. This will democratize and give some transparency to food safety globally, but we're not there yet. And
Does
so,
does that relate to blockchain as well,
yes, it's all
Alan?
done through
Okay.
using blockchain tools.
That's what I thought.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Interesting.
yeah. So as where if you go back in the 1950s, which was probably economically for at least for North America one of the best economic times ever, because it was consumption, but there wasn't overconsumption. So everybody had a car. They didn't have three of them. Everybody had a TV. They didn't have three of them. Nobody had a computer in those days.
Right.
But they had and by the way, most households in the U.S. were single income households. And so it was kind of a great economic time. Well, between global trade and inflation and a lot of other things, and monetary policy as well as fiscal policy in the U.S., we've seen that kind of deteriorate over the years, and so that has opened the door for foreign countries to incentivize their foreign companies to break into our markets. And there's China represents an enormous market. I have a client that makes garage door openers. I remember when they broke into China, I said, well, you're going to make garage door openers in China for America? And they said, no, we're going to make them for Chinese people. I said, I don't remember that they had a lot of garages over there, but apparently they do.
Right.
And so it turns out that's one of their biggest markets now in selling garage door openers in China to Chinese citizens for their
Hmm.
garages. And who would have thought? You and I would have thought. So we have in the U.S., and certainly in Mexico, U.S., and Canada, we have kind of an infantile sort of view of China. And so I keep thinking
Yeah.
about my trips to Asia and my times in China, and I don't think the average U.S. citizen understands the sophistication of their manufacturing, the sophistication of their logistics systems. If they're a V8 engine, they're clicking on all eight cylinders, and they're doing just a great job. In some respects, they become better capitalists than we have, and so the tariffs are an attempt to correct this. And
right,
I'm not
for some companies. I mean, if you have, I don't know what you think about this, but really, if you don't have to follow environmental laws, finance laws,
sure.
All sorts of like rules and regulations, you're going to be less expensive. And you can also have the government subsidize what they wish to dominate.
Right.
I mean, I think unless you do something, like there's just no way to compete.
Yeah,
really.
so if you think about China, here's the advantages they have. First off, they don't have the amount of regulatory, or they don't have the strict regulatory environmental risks that we have, nor do they have the intent to do a whole lot about that. Xi Jinping himself has said, "You guys polluted the environment during the entire Industrial Revolution. Just give us 20 years." And so, he, in a sense, by not having those compliance requirements, that saves their companies a lot of money. Second thing is that they're able to establish hiring, firing, termination, job policies. Most young people in China, when they graduate from their equivalent of high school, they test, and their career is kind of determined for them. I know in our house we've had Chinese students that have stayed with us, and most of them over the years were going into a profession they didn't want to do, but that was what was assigned to them. So that central control always is going to outperform in the short run. It's not going to outperform in the long run, because innovation is a key, and unless you're ripping off people's IP, you're never going to be able to really innovate. The third thing that they've done that's really interesting is that while they have some of the lowest cost labor in the world, the fact is they also outspent the entire world on automation. And so if you go into iPhone City, or you go into some of these big plants in China, what you're going to see is an immense amount of automation. And part of the reason for that is that they apply certain tax rules. So that, the Trump administration's desire to allow 1 year writing off of all CapEx expenses.
Yeah.
This is in China. They're going like, really? That's new? That's the way.
Right.
And so we see that as a way of kind of helping the economy. They see that as an accounting principle that should have always have been. And so that investment in automation. So think about this. We have a competitor, a global trading competitor, that has some of the lowest cost wages in the world, and at the same time, they have high levels of very intelligent, smart automation. That's hard to do. We calculated one day, we were sitting around working on this, and we came to the conclusion, yes, we can compete with China. We just have to have a 6x improvement in productivity. Now think about that.
Okay.
6x.
Well, actually, I mean, it's a lot, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be, it's not surprising to me. And it does seem doable, but it's not like something you could just like turn a switch and make it happen.
Oh, yeah. So that's such a great point, Lisa. It's absolutely doable, but you have to be willing to walk away from old business models. And so we have, so for example, during the, COVID, and we had talked about what happened during COVID, and that all these companies, all of a sudden people couldn't come to work. So they had to start working remotely. And I remember, everybody was talking about the issues about that. And I was thinking from a completely different dimension. I was thinking about how this would affect American Airlines, just using one of the airlines. I thought, and I wrote this paper that said, American Airlines ought to buy Zoom. And the reason is that American Airlines business model is no longer moving people, it's connecting people. Yeah. And by they're moving people in order to connect people, but now there's an alternative for connecting. I mean, all the boards of directors I sit on, I used to travel all the time. More than half of those meetings are now digital meetings, much like we're doing here.
Actually, I mean, I'm not on as many boards, but that's true for me too.
Yeah. And so, it can be made just as effective as sitting there. It's like we said in one of the board meetings, we said when we were making a decision whether we wanted to keep doing digital meetings after the COVID crisis was passed, we asked each other, well, has it been better or worse? And the answer is there's nothing that happened, there's nothing in the digital board meeting that failed to be accomplished that needed to be accomplished. In other words, we got it done. Would you like to meet personally? Well, yeah, I'd like to meet personally, but
from time to time, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's true for like my client projects. In fact, we found that it was more effective because we could get results faster because we can record sessions and then like expedite results instead of like sitting over someone's shoulder, taking notes. I mean, it just, it was, we were just faster at delivering results. So it's like better. I mean, obviously you have to interact with people from time to time to make anything successful, but it didn't require nearly the day-to-day interaction. And in fact, it was just like less productive. We'd have to find a conference room. Half the time we'd be, on different computers in the conference room, which is silly.
Well, and if you look at the economists that look at productivity data from companies, if online meetings and the digital training and digital communications wasn't working, we wouldn't see productivity continuing to increase. And it is continuing to increase.
True.
It's different. This is one of the reasons why I keep talking about my 2025 watchwords have been resiliency and adaptability. We all have to learn how to adapt. I joke to my family, I wake up every morning trying to remember how to be the 70-year-old millennial. That was probably the 70-year-old Gen Zer. But my job as I get older is to not become obsolete. That's an important element of my job.
It is an important element.
It's all of our jobs are that way. And then,
that's right.
And then resiliency is something that goes beyond just that ability to adapt. Resiliency is about having plan Bs and Cs and Ds and knowing when to deploy those and when not to deploy those. It's the same thing. I look at, so I own a farm. You caught me on a day where I'm actually doing a little bit of farm work. And so, we have constant power outages. I mean, our local utility is not the best in the world. We have constant power outages. So I had to say, okay, we can't stop programs. We can't stop meetings. We can't stop the farm. We can't stop the water pumps just because the electric company, failed to, cut down a tree that's going to break a line, right? And so we built our own kind of power capabilities, both through solar and hydroelectric, and because we have a stream running through the property. And that's all part of a resiliency move. And it's about making sure that we can't stop or won't stop just because something else stops. And by the way, COVID was a great example that should go down in the history books of commerce as to how companies really found resiliency. Companies that never talked about resiliency, but they found it because the alternative was to go out of business.
Yep.
And so
you need a significant emotional event, as my HR mentor used to call them, to like force change. And it definitely did that. And to some degree, I think that is part of what the tariffs are about, right? Because like none of this change that we're talking about would happen if there wasn't something forcing it to happen. As another country, who doesn't want to like just continue to have like great volumes with no rules or regulations, low costs, and like great margins? I mean, that sounds great.
Right.
So what's going to compel them to change? Nothing.
Right. So if you go back and study the history of Japan post-World War II, and you go all the way up into the late 1960s, if you saw any product in the U.S. all the way up to late 1960s that had a label on it that said "Made in Japan," your interpretation of that was cheap Japanese junk. And that was the reputation as the Marshall Plan kicked in and they started to rebuild their factories, making products that quality assurance wasn't a real requirement. But then when they wanted to really move up in the status of nations, they realized they had to make quality products. And this is when the Toyota production system and other types of similar tools were really created, because one day they said this business model of, think about it as cheap Japanese trinkets, is not going to work long term. So we need move from a low quality assurance world to a high quality assurance world. Toyota Production System, statistical process control, design of experiment, all of these new techniques and ideas started to become part of the manufacturing culture, not just the manufacturing methods, but it became part of the
Yeah.
culture of the Japanese economy. And the next thing you know, you have Toyota outselling some of the U.S. companies, and they should follow through that. Then they found that they had some of the highest quality products in the automotive industry, and by the way, machine tool industry, particularly molds and dies and things like that,
Yeah.
still do. And then they realized they didn't have enough people to make product, and that was logistically expensive to ship to the U.S. So they started opening up plants in the U.S. I think
Yeah.
I think Toyota, I could be wrong on this, but I believe Toyota has more plants in the U.S. than does General Motors now. And
I,
so,
I would not be surprised. I think you're right about on that topic. And I think maybe that's a good like segue, if you will, because I think that we're entering a new period of time. Like you said, there has to be what's next, right? Like Japan had to go to from being the low cost producer to being the quality producer, and then they moved their production really.
right,
And so we went from being the manufacturing powerhouse to outsourcing
right,
to a new, now we're in new fields.
right. And so the middle, we had a robust middle class because we had a robust manufacturing sector. In fact, the interesting thing about China is that China wanted to have a robust middle class, although they control their middle class differently than we do. But
Yeah.
But an economy to survive needs a robust middle class. Almost every society needs a robust middle class to really grow and to prosper. And they lacked that. They were either agrarian or they were party
Right.
officials, it seemed like. And so they did a great job, and they said manufacturing's the way to get there. Well, we lost that. Everything they gained, in the sense, we lost. And so now we have distribution centers to move a lot of foreign-made products. And distribution, moving a box from aisle
Yeah.
A to a shipping dock takes less. In fact, this is my prediction. The biggest place to automate to become more profitable is in distribution, in these
Oh, I
distribution warehouses.
completely agree. I
And
completely agree. I mean, I think we're going to be doing more and more like AI enabled manufacturing and automation, et cetera. But for sure, distribution is the simplest to automate because it's, I mean, not to
well, those
make it sound too simple, but it is pick, pack, ship, right, move. I mean, these
but,
things aren't things that you can automate them.
yeah, there's plenty of variables, but there's far less variables. I mean, think about a manufacturing company. You've got a bill of material. That bill for one product, your factory makes 10 products, but just take one of those products,
Yep.
and it's got 12 levels to that bill of material. It's got purchase parts that come from 500 different suppliers. You've got 100 different work centers. And if you do the permutations, you do from the bottom of the bill of material, you could find, when you roll it all up, that there are millions and millions of possibility of variables impacting the delivery date on that end item. Whereas in distribution, it's about time, place, utility. Do you have the
Yeah.
material in the right place, in the markets,
At the
at
right
the
time.
right time, at the right price? And
Yep.
and can you move it? And so if you go into the average large distribution center, I am telling you, it's not going to be long before there's going to be quadrupeds and bipeds and other types of devices similar that are going to be moving products.
Absolutely.
And the same thing goes with ports. All ports being built in the
Absolutely.
world, except for in America, are highly automated.
Yeah,
So,
don't even get me started. But you're absolutely right. That has to happen, or we're just going to be. It's going to make the whole
yeah.
it'll make manufacturing come back even more because we're ineffective. At,
Right.
It costs too much to get it through our
Right.
ports.
Right. So the idea is in North America to really grow, we got to find a way to rebalance the global trade equation. Tariffs, unfortunately, are a bit of a tax on the consumer. And that's you can look at that as, say, poor me, or you can look at that as that's a global or a national investment in trying to get other countries to open their markets. So, for example, if China opened its market to U.S. automobiles, it would be a real interesting thing that we would see. A lot of U.S. automobiles will be sold there. If Japan has been absolutely rigid for 6 decades now on not
Yep.
allowing California rice into Japan because it's generally better. People like it in Japan like it better. So there's only, I don't know what the rules are anymore, but 10 years ago, you couldn't take more than 5 pounds back with you if you were a Japanese citizen visiting the US. And so, and that's because they felt like it would just devastate their economy. So much of their economy in
Right.
the past had, agrarian and particularly a rice component to it. So everybody has some adapting to do, and everybody has some resiliency planning to do, and this cannot be done in a vacuum. And so one of the ways, so this is my hypothesis, one of the ways of turning on or turning off the vacuum is just a unilateral tariff. You know what? And if you think about it, what that does is that gets everybody to the table.
Right.
I've observed State departments, and I've talked with plenty of folks in the current State Department about this, and you could look back decades and decades, and just to get meetings of foreign trade representatives with U.S. trade representatives just didn't happen. Well, one day you wake up and say, okay, starting on Monday, there's a 50% tariff. Everybody's heading to the airports to have a meeting.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, in
So,
essence, that's kind of what happened here.
right, right, right. It's in a sense, it's like let's go ahead and let's wreck things a little bit to get people to the table. That seems to be working. So,
Absolutely. It's true. I mean, we do have some significant strides forward with like South Korea to help us with shipbuilding, if you
right,
will. Japan help us
right,
with some of this rare earths and
right,
other, like obviously they're expert in the car, auto manufacturing
right,
and cars and investing. So, some of that. And then people are investing in energy,
right,
which is one way we can offset some of the costs, I think, of
right,
the increased imports. Like eventually, like the National Association of Manufacturers has a statistic that for every dollar invested in manufacturing, you get $2.67 added to the economy. But the problem is the time frame, right? Because you have to, once you get manufacturing ramped up, then those economic benefits become clear. It's between the
right.
time frames, right? So I think we'll get there, but it's like managing that transition and then
Yeah.
how to do that successfully, which goes back to product design and some
Yeah,
other
totally
topics.
agree with you. Lisa, the challenge is never really identifying where we stand and where we need to go. It's how we manage the pain and the transition.
That is
Transitions
true,
are
right?
always the challenge.
It's true.
The solutions are actually, solutions can almost be mathematically modeled. And, the math is the math is the math. But how do you get people there? We know that the current, so for example, the healthcare systems in the United States don't work very efficiently. We know that,
Right.
and we know 2 or 3 different potential solutions, but there's going to be pain in that transition.
How do we get from here to there?
We know that AI can change the way the decision making is done. So AI can be a real benefit to the decision making process because of the ability to do scenario planning and alternative planning very, very rapidly. So the logic is, well, that's going to put people out of work because the computer will do in 3 minutes what takes 14 people with spreadsheets to do over 2 or 3 weeks. And that's probably true. But you know what? Historically, there has never been a great technological invention in the world that has caused long-term displacement.
Right.
Most of them, there's a short-term and oftentimes a localized or regionalized problem, but never a long-term. I mean,
Right.
we talk about, you lost a lot of horse and buggy makers or buggy
Exactly.
makers, but all of a sudden you had factories building cars, which means you also had factories making steel, which means you also had mines digging iron ore. And so people had to find their ways into those, and no amount of government incentives have ever worked historically to move people into those new professions. What happens is an opportunity to make money moves them.
Right. Right. I completely agree with you. And there's no reason to think that this is going to be any different. We have the transition, like in the past, we had the transition to the internet, which took over everything. And now we all see it as like part of our day. Same thing's happening with AI. And on the other hand, we went from outsourcing not literally everything, but most things and many essential things like pharmaceuticals and rare earths. But we're going to have to go back to, like you said, building those capabilities, which is definitely going to provide a new set of skills. We won't necessarily need, like you said, people in the warehouses. You're not going to need very many. But you are going to need people who can make robots and automation and, right? You're going to need all that.
Right. Well, I mean, you take a look at some of the highly automated factories. The maintenance departments are multiple sizes larger than they used to be. And so you have to have people. Now, to do maintenance, you have to, versus, think about in an auto factory, putting tires on the car every day, tire after tire after tire, versus having to diagnose a problem with a machine or with a robot or with some automation or some software. And so those critical thinking skills and logic skills have to be trained. In other words, non-repetitive jobs will grow and will blossom. Repetitive jobs will suffer the wrath of automation. And by the way, historically, they always have anyways.
Yeah, that's true. And so it's just going to mean that you have to be paying more attention to continuous learning and also providing more creative ways to get your teams up to speed and learning new activities. Go ahead.
Yeah, so from a societal perspective, we wonder about, what are you going to do with the people who can't adapt? And I think that's a false narrative, a false discussion. The question ought to be, how do we get people to adapt to a different way of doing things? And I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he said, look, there's going to be a whole amount of people who just are not going to be capable, and this was an argument for a basic universal income. And it's a legitimate argument. I get that. I just happen to think that human beings are they're not wood, they're not steel. They're fairly adaptable. And anybody who's grown up and has had kids or has grown up and had family members and moved once or twice in their life understands what adaptability is. And so we just need to find ways to smooth adaptations and make them less of a challenge. And a lot of that's going to come through education and training. This is where ASCM and others and people in our profession can really add value by helping people to understand that they don't have to do the same thing over and over.
No, I completely agree. Like from a consulting perspective, I don't even know if I've ever met one person that couldn't absorb the information or learn additional skills. Now, they may not be able to get there in the time frame required for a specific client, if you will, but that's different. But they all could, I haven't found people that just simply couldn't learn unless they were had an attitude issue, right? That's a different problem. And there's going to be some percentage that do, but that's, the 80-20 is going to be is going to adapt. Like you said, horse and buggies to cars is a good example.
I go back early in my career. We did some work for Northrop during the B2 program, consulting work for them. And I always remember this, in those days when they were the B2 program, they needed digital engineers, people who really understood. This was the early days of CAD, CAM and things like that. And digital engineers, we joked, they were never hired by Northrop. They were bought. And it was whatever you had to pay them, you paid them. So you had, back in the 80s, young people, 23-year-old people, 24-year-old people out of college, out of Stanford, getting $150,000 a year to start as a digital engineer. And wow. And they did great. And they had a great life and they had a great career and they learned a lot. And then I remember when there was this young man that I knew at Northrop, and I talked with him, and he just was on top of the world as a digital engineer, airframe engineer. What he actually did was secret, so I had zero idea what it was, but I knew the department he was in, and so he obviously was smart and capable. But then one day, the B2 program ended, and they started laying these people off. And I remember him saying to me over coffee when he goes, "How can they do this to me? If you go back 5 years ago, they were offering me the sun and the moon and the stars and money to come and work for them. And now they're tossing me away." And I said, this was actually, it's 6 years. He's been there 6 years. I remember now. And I asked him, I said, when did you get a sense that the program was going to end? because everybody knows when the program was going to end.
Right.
And he goes, well, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. He said, you realize you could have got another degree in those 2 years.
Right.
You could have gone to school to become an accountant, or you could have gone to school to become a chemical engineer and moved over to an energy sector or something. And so, in a sense, your unwillingness to
Right.
adapt, made you non-resilient. And now you've got 2 years. So that, if you, as long as you got good money in your savings
Yeah,
account, get
that's
at it.
right.
Get at it right away. But this is the point of all companies and all manufacturing in all elements in the supply chain. Everything is going to become obsolete.
That's very true. I mean, there's just so much that's changing, and you're right. I mean, that's one way to look at it is like you have to stay ahead of the obsolescence that's going to follow you, right? So, I mean, to
Right,
some degree, really, to keep learning new skills,
right.
and as an employer, you have to support your team to
Right.
learn these different skills so that they can apply them in different ways. Because there's going to be new AI softwares, like you these days you can implement technology that'll tell you exactly where everything is in your supply chain and at a moment's notice.
Right.
So there's just like you said, vast differences. And I think this also relates to thinking about things differently, which I know is another topic that you had, which is like as you're like, let's say, moving your manufacturing to the US or maybe to Mexico, you should be not moving it the way it is, right? I mean, you should be thinking about it differently, redesigning products, maybe do more automatable. And I don't know, what do you think about that? I mean, you should look at
Yeah.
it anew.
Yeah, just presume that nothing's going to be forever. Years ago, we had a number of years where we did a lot of factory design work and we did a lot of warehouse design work. And I remember in those years, it was really interesting. I met this CEO and he said, look, we got this brand new building. And if you look closely at the walls, all four sides have knockout doors. So they're concrete walls. But if you look closely, you could see there was a seam and they knocked out. And he said, because at some point in time, we won't be manufacturing here and we can lease this by knocking those doors out as a distribution center or as a manufacturing company by leaving them in. He said, I want the ceiling, before we even move in, I want the ceiling grid of air lines, electric lines, and water lines on 12-foot centers. And that way, I said, why would you do that? I said, so I can move equipment anywhere I want, and I don't have to call in electricians with big lifts and disrupt production. And I thought, this guy's thinking ahead. And that's the way we all need to think in terms of our supply chain. First off, a supplier is never forever. A customer is never forever. A factory design is never forever. I have the studio that I'm sitting in. Every piece of equipment, the desk I'm at, my file cabinet, even my 500-pound fireproof file cabinet, everything is on wheels. Everything, when we design this, everything is on wheels so we can move it around, reorganize the studio, and do whatever we want to do with it. We haven't moved anything in the last 2 years, but that doesn't mean we won't in the future. So portability is really important. Portability of people, portability of engineering, portability of manufacturing. All of this is what adds up and makes a company more resilient. And that means, by the way, also keeping your antenna up and thinking about what other companies are doing, other countries are doing. There's a company in the UK that's redesigned the whole concept of warehousing. You've probably seen the YouTube video where effectively they took the racks and they laid them on their side and the robots run across them and pick things from down below. And that was a complete rethinking of distribution warehousing. And then you had to keep the robots from running into one another because there's hundreds of them. And so they had to go to the US airline industry and the FAA, and they found that the air traffic control system already had the basic guidelines for how to keep things from running. So they borrowed from that technology and they built off of, actually, I think they licensed the software and actually built the version off of that. And so one of the things about being adaptable and about having a resilient supply chain is understanding that almost anything that you are dreaming about has likely been invented in another industry already. And you got to go find it.
And we see that in consulting, right? Because that's part of what we do. We can take something from a very opposite industry, if you will, and apply that, whatever it is, could be systems, processes, who knows, equipment, and you can apply the concepts to something completely different. So
Right.
you're absolutely right. Actually, it may be really what our conversation and our podcast listeners can take away today is, to be adaptable, resilient. Creating a resilient supply chain, you have to be more innovative, creative, willing to continuously learn, take smart risks. I think, and just I think be prepared to change. Like in the future,
Right.
volatility is the new normal, or however you want to put that.
Well, that's right. And if volatility is the new normal, then you just have to figure out ways of managing volatility. And that's
Yeah.
a lot easier said than done for sure. And it requires a different type of investment. And it requires that one be willing to walk away from old ideas. I mean, the world is full of businesses that don't exist anymore because companies just weren't willing to walk away from a business model that no longer worked. They kept trying to fix it. I mean, years ago we had done work for a big investor group, and they were a big investor. They're like a 4 or 5% owner of Kmart. And so they
Oh,
asked us
yes.
to look at this. And I remember looking at this, and I came back and I said, well, after all of our analysis of Kmart, here's in the markets, here's what we concluded. They are in the no man's land now of retailing. They're somewhere between Walmart and Target. And guess what? The world doesn't need anything in between.
Right,
So,
right. Well, I mean,
and
that is the
yeah,
situation, and then they went away.
yeah, right, right. And then we said, so the best solution is to sell it, sell every store, everything, get out while you can. And of course they didn't, and eventually they ended up in BK, and then ended up having to divest. But the point is that things will change, and we need to accept that. Volatility is just change that's not predictable and usually is larger scale. It has bigger
Yeah, true,
consequences.
true. Well,
So,
another example of that is Sears, right? Because Sears was the Amazon before Amazon was
right,
here, and
that's
now
right,
Sears is like largely gone away because it didn't
right,
evolve, which is sad. But
correct.
but it's absolutely true. It's like if you want to be successful, you almost have to continue to worry about building skills and building your teams
Right.
building a culture of innovation, to your point, and resiliency, and not worry about specific. I mean, no, everyone can follow, like, I don't know, follow A, B, C, D. Sure.
Right.
Like even a computer can do that. So now things are gonna go up another level, it seems, to be successful.
Correct. Well, that's right. And I think that, that's where you can't have, a life of linear thinking. You have to be more adaptive, have more of an adaptive and a systems thinking mind. And you have to remember that, again, as things are going to change, you can sit around and complain about it, or you can do something about it, or you can get ahead of it. And,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of industries to learn from, or there's lessons to be learned in the construction industry and how they get ahead of things. And there's things to be learned in certain distribution environments. There's things to learn from the banking industry. There's things to learn, well, some things to learn from the healthcare industry.
That's true. There's
Yeah,
always, I
yeah,
find that even in the worst plants, there's usually something that
yeah,
you can take away, or if you have like multiple plants in a company, even the worst plant ever has somebody or something that you could
right.
probably take away as a positive, and then you look for that as you go and
Right.
put them together. Well,
Well, and
Ellen,
even as human beings, by the way, that happens to us every time a colleague or somebody I'm working with, a client loses his or her job, and they come to me and they go, "What should I do next?" I go, "Well, the first thing you should do is get out two pieces of paper, and one piece of paper you write down all the things that I would do differently." That from my experience, all the things I would do differently. And the other piece of paper is write down all the things I swear to God I will never change. And
right. That's true.
and you should have that before you decide what you're going to do with your career next. And
Absolutely.
if you have that, it really clarifies the directions that you should go.
It's kind of like start, stop, continue in a way.
Exactly,
But yeah, absolutely. Well, I
exactly.
mean, it's crazy how time has flown by. Do you have any
Yeah,
last thoughts to put this into to what we should be thinking about moving forward?
yeah. So, my last thought on this is since we started off talking about globalization and trade. We are in a time of chaos right now. This chaos will pass. All chaos passes. There was nothing
Mhm.
more chaotic in global supply chains than happened in World War II, when steel and textiles and coffee and everything else went on restrictions, and oh, sorry about that. And am I still here, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay,
You're
sorry,
here.
I had a wrong
That's
button here.
okay.
Yeah, and so sorry about that. And so people forget that the reason we had woody automobiles was because they had to build some of the car parts out of wood because the steel was used for the defense industry. Guess what? We got through that, and the auto industry ended up stronger. So the point here is that we will get through all of this, but we won't get through it applying the same rules as we've applied in the past. We've learned a great lesson through COVID that just in time has its place, and it's got a place where it shouldn't be just in time.
Correct.
We learned through the financial crisis that managing debt was very, very important. The 2008 financial crisis, having access to capital was incredibly important. Not just having capital, but having access, rapid access to it was important. And so every time we go through these things, there's something to be learned. We've learned through this current problem, a crisis that we have, particularly with global trade and the tariff du jour that's happening almost every day, we've learned that it never stops international commerce. So goods have not stopped flowing.
That's
They may
true.
be more expensive, and some channel intermediaries have absorbed some of those costs. So it's not the crisis that the media paints it to be. It's a
It's true.
it's an unpredictable set of business events that have alternate solutions, and that requires deep thinking. That requires some commitment to directions, and it requires some courage. But most importantly of all, it requires viewing data and facts, good data and bad data, with equal view. In other words,
Yeah.
if I've got if there's bad news and good news is just news to react to and to do something with, not to punish people for, not to
Correct.
overreact to. Just good news and bad news has equal weight, and just apply it calmly.
Correct. Absolutely. You have to be a thinking leader,
Right,
and you're absolutely right. You have to
right,
maintain calm because,
right,
especially if we're in volatility, is the new normal. The last
right,
thing you want to do is be chaotic. You'll just create
right,
more chaos.
right,
But
right.
I think
That's
there's
right.
vast opportunities, really. So I mean, if you agree with this, Alan, but I see this as like the probably one of the most significant opportunities. We're heading into one of the time frames of most significant opportunity for businesses that do this well than at almost any other time in history. Because they think that things are going to evolve at a rapid pace. There's going to be winners and losers, and like the winners are going to be doing all the things we talked about on this podcast.
Yeah, my metaphor is, if you live in Florida, hurricanes are a really, really bad thing unless you own the roofing company in town.
That's right.
And so
That's absolutely right, actually.
somebody's going to win out of even chaos, and even sometimes out of bad things. There's going to be some winners and losers. And so we need to prepare for that, and we need to figure out how we're going to address that. Um,
Be the winner.
Imagine if all of a sudden China says, let's allow any company to ship products into our marketplaces from anywhere in the world. Well, all of a sudden, think about that. Sounds great until you realize that every westernized country will become a competitor in China. Right
Yep.
now, the only competitor, if we're selling anything in China, is a Chinese company. What if every country in the world was allowed to ship their products in? It would be
Yeah.
ultra competitive, and
Yeah.
that may not be an easy thing to be successful at.
It's absolutely true. It reminds me of what my consulting mentor said that, if taxis weren't as frustrating as they used to be, Uber would not have been born, because it
Right.
was born because
Exactly.
somebody saw a problem and they came up with a service that was like more digital as
Correct.
well as, cleaner, timely, and it's largely eliminated most taxis from most places.
So my question is on that one is, why didn't Yellow Cab Company, why did they not invent Uber? Think about that.
exactly, they should have. It's like Sears should have invented the Amazon, but they
That's
didn't.
exactly right. That's
I mean,
exactly
and
right.
you know what? In Japan, that's the other thing, I'll credit to him. But in Japan, they have fabulous taxis, and so Uber never took place
Right.
because they didn't need Uber because the
Right.
taxis innovated, right?
That's
So
right.
that's where we
Exactly
need to
right.
be if you want to be successful, personally and or your company.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I always tell people, that you listen to all the economists, and one of the things that you'll see is very, very common amongst economists who are looking at the macro level at industries and countries and regions. They always underestimate the value of innovation and technology and great leadership. Those are three things that are always overlooked by economists and oftentimes lead to a completely different end result than what they were predicting.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate you joining us today, and definitely take hold on some of these thoughts and start now. You can't wait too long to get going, to become more adaptable and innovative, and learn additional skills, and encouraging your teams to do so as well. So thank you very much, Alan.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.